Hello, Kevin. How are you today?
Fine, Fen. Doing really well. How are you?
Fine, thanks. So I wanted to share with you some information related to an article I wrote recently on Substack, which is related to public opinion, because I think that public opinion is not taken sufficiently seriously, um, because we tend to focus so much on democracy, so much on elections, so much on the ballot box, that we tend to, as a majority, to forget a little bit about public opinion. And in fact, those who rule, the rulers, they actually consider public opinion much more than we do, we who actually make up the public opinion. And this is the reason for this is simply that public opinion is key for deciding whether the government will survive, whether the government is popular, and more largely the state itself. And I think that it's not a coincidence that public opinion has not been, let's say, discussed, because it's not in the interest of those who rule, the powers that be, to point the finger at public opinion. There are lots of public opinion polls, of course, but these public opinion polls are taken much more seriously, actually, by those who rule rather than the public. And actually, those who rule, they have their own polls that are not public because they need to keep the finger on the pulse constantly. And this is, of course, not new. What I discussed in this article is the fact that this is something that has been identified by many authors for a long time, um, going back to actually Etienne de la Boétie, who was a French thinker from the 16th century, that he really was one of the first to identify the power that the majority can have over the ruler. And at that time, we're talking about absolute rulers or dictatorial rulers or tyrannies, right? We're not even talking about democracies. Democracies are much more actually dependent on the majority opinion, on public opinion than was the case in those days. Um, so the article is called "Public Opinion Cornered by the Many, Controlled by the Few." Now, why do I say cornered by the many, controlled by the few? It's because actually public opinion is, of course, controlled by the few. I think that most people understand that based on what I just said, public opinion is key for the rulers. And going back to this author, Etienne de la Boétie, he noted that even the most tyrannical ruler needs the approval of a majority in order to rule. That means that his rule cannot be so tyrannical, so detrimental to the common welfare or the common weal that the majority completely rejects him, right? You don't want to have a revolution on your hands, right? So you need to basically, as a ruler, in a very Machiavellian way, exploit the society, exploit the people as much as possible, but never to a degree to which basically the majority will start to reject the ruler. That means that public opinion always has pressure that it can put on the government, and this is even more so in democracies. Why? Because in democracies, we kind of officialize public opinion by elections every couple of years. But that doesn't make public opinion less important between elections. It just means that the government is even more, let's say, dependent on public opinion than was the case several hundred years ago. Um, so that's why basically the many, or the few, will try to control public opinion as much as possible. It's in their interest to do so. So there are lots of techniques to do that. And I go through the different works basically that have described all of this. So nothing is new here. It's just that that the works that describe this have not been so much taught or discussed um, at educational facilities and in the media and so on. If we take a look at Russia and India, for example, it's very clear that the perceptions of Russia and India in the West has changed dramatically. For example, I take the example that in a recent studies show actually that the view on China of China has become negative, very much so. It has gone from 46% negative views to 67% negative views in just a couple of years. And this has been confirmed by many studies. And this cannot be explained just by the natural evolution of public opinion, because of course public opinion evolves naturally. It must be explained by active, proactive attempts to control, to direct, to influence public opinion, which is what the ruling minority always does, right? We need to be aware of that. And the same is related, the same goes for Russia. There has been a negative opinion about Russia among the majority in many Western countries for years, where when actually most Westerners, most people in Western Europe or the United States have actually zero contact with Russia, even culturally. And if they do have some contact, they do read maybe some Russian novels from time to time, but most Westerners have never even visited Russia and they know nothing about the country. But they have a negative view of Russia, many of them, despite the fact that it was the Soviet Union, for instance, that basically liberated Western Europe from Nazism. So this can only be explained, of course, by the ruling minority wanting a negative view of Russia, and this is quite clear. We see that patriotism also plays a very important role. This is the phenomenon called rallying around the flag, right? We can see that regardless of what a president in the United States does, whether he does it well or not, um, you can see that when there is a reason for being patriotic or nationalistic, for example, during conflicts, we can see that the public opinion naturally tends to concentrate or to be naturally tends to be in favor of the person in power or the executive in power at that moment. We can see this very clearly from this graph. So now I wanted to discuss also a little bit more in detail what we call the tyranny of the majority. But before I do that, I wanted to just let you have a word if you have some comments up to now.
So I always have a word. So, when I read it, what I immediately thought about is Plato and the Republic and his concept of a noble lie, and even more so, his three levels of what we can call discourse. So there's what he calls the gold level, and this is what he says philosophers engage in, also a military strategist, and on this level, reality, an open argument, and the search is for the truth or for the best way, and so there is no censorship. Um, but in order to enter into this conversation, you need a lot of training, or you need at least the to put in the effort to be able to discuss on that level. And historically, most people were, breaking their backs in the fields, growing crops, and they didn't have time to to prepare themselves for these kind of discussions. And so, the gold level now, okay, we have a easier society with more free time. And so, with the dispersion of the internet, more of us have the possibility and the time to strive for the gold level of discourse, of interaction. The next level down is what he called the silver level. And this is what we see very prevalent today. And this is what manipulates public opinion. These are so-called experts, or say in the military domain, authorities, retired generals who go on the TV and basically preach to the masses to convince them of their narrative, basically, that Russia is bad, that China is bad. And their job is not to tell the truth or to even be coherent. Their job is to move public opinion towards the way the few, as you put it, desire the public opinion to be. And then Plato talks about two other levels that are kind of combined and kind of not. The iron and copper level are what the masses, their kind of conversations. What I find really interesting is that he cut it into iron and copper, and he might not have meant to do this, but we see this now in partisan strife. For basically, societies are broken into more or less two, sometimes more, political factions which fight with each other and spend all their energy, attacking each other without ever really approaching the higher levels of what's really going on, and how they can impact their interests. And so, in reading yours, that's kind of what I thought of, what it reminded me of.
Yeah,
And it's particular.
yeah, you're right. It's a very good point. It really is connected to that. Uh, I have one point though, is that yes, indeed, you need education in order to be able to handle more and more complex topics in society. That's true. But remember that the right disposition is also important. A lot of common sense, right, is also very
Yes.
important, because I see this a lot in France, but it's true basically everywhere. The closer you come to power, the closer you come to the, you know, upper bourgeoisie and the people who live in the cities, the more aligned they tend to be with power, the more aligned they tend to be with the lies that are told. And they don't maybe even realize that these are lies, or they maybe just at an unconscious level,
It's a very good
because they
point. And
understand that it is in their interest not to rock the boat, because their career depends on it. And
so
yeah.
it's a very good point. And what it comes down to is being institutionalized. So, say a philosopher who works for a university in a department, he's going to be very limited. He's going to actually tend towards the silver level of manipulating the masses and telling the discourse and the narratives that the bosses, that the few want. Someone who's independent of institutions is much freer. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be more talented or right, but they do have some freedom where they don't have to worry about what the college president is going to say, and they can be, or the political party or whatever. And so that's one nice thing about the internet, is you can get more and more kind of independent people who are just striving for that gold level of discourse, which means they may be too much education might be bad for you in that sense,
In that
if you've been
sense,
too
it's
indoctrinated by
Yeah,
the
in that
powers that
sense,
be.
it's true, because going through the having a lot of education often means going through the university path, and that automatically means that you are being put into a funnel, and that you are taught to think in a certain way, think as your professors, think as your institutions, and of course, this can limit your capability of critical thinking. Actually, that is really a problem. It's a counterintuitive, but it seems to be that way. And if you look at this common sense aspect, you see that when you speak to people that are living far from power on the countryside, both in the United States, in France, or wherever it may be, you realize that they often have a very keen understanding of what really is going on. I talk a lot to people who are taxi drivers, lorry drivers, and people who are living on the countryside, simple people, but intelligent and curious people. And they often have fully understood what's going on. Maybe they don't know it in detail or cannot express it so clearly, but they have fully understood what's going on. Um, with relation to different wars, with relation to corruption in government, etc. So this is very interesting.
That's true.
And this aspect I was talking about um, now comes to the point of the tyranny of the majority, right? Because this is a conservative aspect of society. So John Stuart Mill wrote his famous book on liberty, 1859, which basically talked about the dangers of collective opinion, basically the tyranny of the majority. That means the dominant opinions and feelings that society is trying to impose on a minority. And here we're not talking about the ruling minority. We're talking about a minority such as you and I, the minority that doesn't think like everybody else, right? We are constantly being, let's say, suggested to think and express feelings and opinions in a certain way, and this is very natural in a way because society's majority, as I write here, is naturally intolerant of non-conformism because thinking like everybody else gives psychological comfort and strengthens social ties. This is why basically society has this kind of mechanism of suppressing opinions that are not popular. This is very dangerous, but this is a natural phenomenon occurring in society. So the minority must fight this, right? This is why we come back to this Turkish thinker called Timur Kuran, who wrote a very interesting book in the 90s called Public Lies and Private Truths. So some people may understand that the truth, for example, related to the epidemic, the truth or the pandemic, the truth related to climate change, for example, the truth related to immigration is not the one that is being told by the mainstream media, but they will go along with it, at least passively, in public, at work, in a large gathering, because they do not want to rock the boat. They do not want to be excluded. And it doesn't benefit them in any way to do that. Seeking truth, seeking truth, let's say, officially and publicly, does not always benefit everybody unless it's their line of work. However, they
Yes.
will be fine to talk the truth in private when they are in their small circle of friends or in family, right? When they can trust the people and their opinions are not going to be spread. Now, of course, nowadays you need to pay attention because everybody has smartphones that can record. But generally, this is, I think, a correct appreciation.
Absolutely. This goes back to the noble lie, the need for public cohesion of a people. And so there's foundational myths that, we're all this people, we all, there's all these ideas that form our nation. And those, you need some cohesion like that. But if someone challenges those, a social critic comes out and challenges those too openly, it's true the majority are going to be threatened. Like, what's this guy saying? What is he? Because those noble lies can be used against the interests of the majority too.
Exactly.
So it's a back and forth. Your essay captures this really well.
Thanks a lot. So, one point which is important is the point made by Herbert Marcuse, who was more
I
like
mean,
a neo-Marxist. But he made this important point that basically the tolerant society, if you want to have a tolerant society, if the objective is to have a tolerant society, which is generally, I think, what we are all looking for, it means that we should be actually more intolerant toward prevailing policies, opinions, attitudes, and we should extend tolerance to policies, attitudes, and opinions which are basically outlawed or suppressed. So here I think he touches on a very key point, and this is a little bit counterintuitive, but this is necessary for the healthy society. So we must constantly encourage these opinions which are outlawed or suppressed, typically the opinion related to Russia, related to Iran, related to immigration, the pandemic, related to many different aspects, which are, let's say, suppressed or outlawed opinions. So I think this is important to mention. Here I listed some works. I'm not going to go through them all right now, but these are some works which I really consider to be key in order to talk about, on the one hand, this aspect of the tyranny of the majority, which is also captured by this crowd psychology that we tend to go along with the crowd. Um, we also have Gaetano Mosca, very important book on
yeah.
the ruling minority. And we have another important book which goes a little bit to what you were saying about the gold and silver level. Basically, it's a very influential essay by Hayek from
Yes,
1949
yes,
called
exactly.
Intellectuals and Socialism, which I really can recommend to everyone. So all of these academics and journalists and pundits that you mentioned, Kevin, they were called by Hayek second-hand dealers of ideas,
Yes.
which is a
He
which
took
is
that from Plato, basically.
yeah. And they are acting as the gatekeepers of political power. They don't bring any added value as such, no new ideas, but they will basically take the ideas that are acceptable by political power and basically simplify them and spread them among the population. Then we have, of course, Brave New World, Manufacturing of Consent by Chomsky and Herman, and a recent book which basically revisits a lot of these themes, which is a mass formation psychosis by Matthias Desmet. So just to round it off here, this is the reason why I I mentioned in this article that the public opinion is actually squeezed on both sides. On the one hand, it's squeezed by the majority in the form of the tyranny of the majority. And on the other hand, it's squeezed also by the ruling minority, which is basically the control of media. That's why I also like to use popular culture to get my point across. Like Jim Morrison, who said, "Whoever controls the media controls the mind." It seems obvious, but I think when a person like Jim Morrison says it, it can really reach a lot of young people. And again, who are you supposed to convince? It's not people of our age. It is the young people, because people of our age, they are already too old to really change their opinion about society and about the world. They cannot do that any longer, only in very rare occasions. That's why all of our efforts to expose the world as it is, should go towards convincing or showing to young people what freedom is and what is really, influencing society.
I
Um,
wanted, I just wanted to talk about Marcuse again a little bit.
sure.
He's a very interesting guy, obviously, a Marxist or a neo-Marxist because he invented a new kind of Marxism.
Yeah.
But his point, it's very much like freedom of speech. So when the left were well out of power in the 60s, they were all for freedom of speech, and he was all for this, tolerating like uh, narratives that challenge power. But as soon as the left reached cultural power, say in the 2010s, that completely flipped, and it became complete intolerance. Free speech became a right wing attitude, and open discourse became more right wing because the right were out of power. And so,
Right.
really, the people who want freedom of speech and who want open debate tend to be out of power. And people who don't,
Yes.
who want to shuttle that down, want to maintain their power.
Good point.
Um,
Excellent point. Yeah, you're right. And finally, what I end with is basically freedom, because what all of this comes back to is who is controlling society, and in order to reduce the control of politicians, the political control of society, you need to reduce the power of the state. There's no other way. That's why I argue for freedom, for libertarianism, that basically has that encompasses all of these ideas that I've just expressed. Here we're talking about the famous marketplace of ideas, right? Which is very similar in a way to the free market in goods and services, but which cannot fully exist. It can never exist fully, right? I mean, because ideas are, of course, always influenced and controlled by some, right? But at least we can get as close as possible to a marketplace of ideas, but which can certainly not exist in the current context of pervasive crony capitalism,
okay.
mainstream media spin, and massive state intervention, right? So
That
this is
you
what
point
we're
out
driving for.
the flaw in that argument is that a lot of the censorship is being done by Google, TikTok, by private companies. Because everyone talks, oh, we have freedom of speech for the government. Yes, but a private company is allowed to censor you
No,
and to
but
limit speech.
you have to remember that these are not private companies. TikTok was just bought by Ellison, right?
I know, I know, I
Okay.
know, I
And
know.
Google, all these companies that you mentioned are not private companies in the sense of libertarianism, in the sense of the free
Okay.
market. They are not. They are,
They're
they
part
have
of the
been,
state apparatus,
they are
as
part,
French
maybe
Marxists would
not,
say.
maybe not state apparatus, but they are part of the crony capitalist system
That's
that
what
we
I,
have. And they
yeah.
could not have reached actually the influence, the size, and the power that they have without having been basically connected to the state from the very beginning. There are lots of works about that, about how the CIA and also other government agencies were involved at the very beginning, both with Facebook as well as with Google. And you can see all the huge contracts that exist between Amazon and the Department of Defense, etc. So this is not at all. These are not private companies, should not be seen and looked at as private companies in the classical sense. Okay. But
I agree. And so, but I think that's for a long time that's been the case. Most media barons who were manipulating media 50, 70, 100 years ago were also in that weird space of capitalism and government mixed together. One thing, Herbert Marcuse, he worked for the CIA.
ah,
Seriously, it's not
interesting.
even a doubt. He
Interesting. I didn't know that.
you
Maybe
can
we can place.
understand because he was Jewish from Germany, and so during World War II, he worked with the OAS to help fight Hitler, which is completely understandable. But he stayed on afterwards, and so there's a lot of
Very interesting.
suspicion
And
of him. But
maybe
his quote is, I agree with his quote completely.
yeah, I agree with his quote. He has a lot of interesting thoughts about society. In my work, what I'm trying to do with libertarianism is try to include more and more of such interesting ideas from
Yeah,
people like Marcuse or Foucault and others into the realm of libertarianism, because they also have interesting things to bring to the debate, even though we cannot agree with everything or even with most of what they're saying. So
I
anyway,
was
thanks a
impressed by
lot.
the range of your sources on this article. That you had really made an effort to go out and get interesting thinkers, like top quality gold, I would call gold thinkers,
Thanks.
uh, to um, to back up your points.
So that was it. I think that was an interesting exchange. Thanks a lot, Kevin, and we'll be back soon with another video.
Yes, we will. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. Bye bye.